we're just going to go practice local sovereignty. We're just going to go do real things in the real world with real people who live near us. And that's the only way that we can actually practically build towards the version of the future that we want to see. Yeah.
And
do you know that there's that picture everybody uses, the meme of like what society would be like if we just did this thing, and it's this picture of all these like silver skyscrapers and flying cars and stuff. You know what's missing from that picture?
What's missing?
People.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the ATX DAO podcast, where various members of the ATX DAO take turns leading discussions, everything and all things crypto. Today, I'm your host, Philip. I am an ATX DAO member since the Blue Bonnet class of 2023 and recently appointed a DAO steward. Today, we're being joined by special guests from Cabin, Grin and John, both founders of Cabin. And just a quick disclaimer, nothing we say here is investment or legal advice and in no relation to at least my professional career. And if you want more information, feel free to check out atxdao.com. I forgot to ask you guys if in this disclaimer, if this is any relation to your guys' professional careers, in case you have like any legalities that you need to protect yourself from.
Yeah, we're not lawyers. We're not financial advisors. It's definitely not legal or financial advice.
Yeah. We're like, we barely spend any time reading or even are like kind of illiterate. So I wouldn't listen to anything we say.
Likewise. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm definitely excited to sort of get a little bit deeper into Cabin and all things DAO as well. Do you guys want to first sort of introduce yourselves and what Cabin's all about?
Yeah, I'm John Hillis and a founder of Cabin. Cabin is building a network city of modern villages. And so our goal is to build neighborhoods all over the world that are places where you'd want to grow up.
I'm Grin, also from Cabin. I am in charge of the more technical side, product side of Cabin, which is what you see when you go to cabin.city. It's connecting this network of villages. The villages and the in-person neighborhoods, I think, are the most important part of what Cabin's doing right now. But by connecting them, we create something even greater than small, isolated communities around the world.
Awesome. Yeah, I was sort of going through your guys' platform yesterday, and I saw your guys' Neighborhood Accelerator Program. And that's probably like your bread and butter and sort of like this whole initiative. How does sort of like one go about joining this Neighborhood Accelerator? And what's sort of like the steps of starting this whole process?
Yeah, so I can provide first just a little context on what the accelerator is. So yeah, our goal at Cabin is to help people build their local neighborhoods wherever they are in the world. And we do that through the Neighborhood Accelerator Program. So it's a cohort-based program that people join and includes essentially mentorship and peer accountability, where you are going through a curriculum alongside a bunch of other people and actually going through the process of building your local neighborhood. And we talk about that in terms of two components: turning your neighbors into friends and turning your friends into neighbors. And both of those are a part of one of our core obvious truths at Cabin, which is that you should live near friends, and that is one of the best ways to improve your life. And so what we actually do in the accelerator program, the first steps are pretty, simple things that are about meeting your neighbors. It's about saying hi to people on the street, knocking on doors, and hosting some kind of local recurring event where you can invite people out, maybe to the park or to your backyard or to a dinner party, start to get to know them. Maybe set up a group chat that you can use to coordinate. And then over time, start to build the local collective action that you can do in your neighborhood with the other people around you. So that will depend, of course, on where you live and what types of things people want to do. But, we have neighborhoods in the Cabin network where people have started building community gardens or emergency preparedness caches, or just recurring events where they get together and hang out frequently. And we believe that by doing this type of work, you can start to essentially create the type of place that's really great to live in, great to raise kids in. And you can do this through the accelerator program alongside other people doing it all over the world.
Yeah, in
Awesome.
terms of joining the program, so the best way to do that is to go to cabin.city, and there are links at the top, kind of all over the page, to join the Network Accelerator. It is also helpful if you have time to set aside to make this your focus or one of your maybe top 2 focuses during the program. It would takes maybe a couple hours a week of thinking, doing the calls that we do once a week. And it's helpful if you've tried at least a little bit to create some community near you. Maybe you've tried to invite your neighbors over. Maybe you've said hi to your neighbors, you've invited them. It's good to at least take that first step. But we are happy to help you, whether this is your first time doing something like this, or if we have someone in this current cohort who's been doing it for 10 years and has done it multiple places. And she still finds a lot of value in doing this together with people.
What sort of has been like the you guys probably have spoken with a lot of these cohort founders or these neighborhood starters. What sort of has been sort of like these big roadblocks in starting this? Is there like a repeating theme?
Yeah, so we call them neighborhood stewards, the people who start these neighborhoods. And neighborhood stewards, I think like the biggest blocker for a lot of people is just getting over the initial anxiety of like saying hi to strangers on the street and actually doing the thing. And that's something we talk about and think about a lot at Cabin is like, it's very easy to and fun to like think about the theory of, network societies or these sort of things. But the most important thing is to actually just do it, to, go build what you want, to go say hi to your neighbors, to go host an event. And I think for a lot of people, just getting over that initial hurdle of like actually introducing yourself to a stranger on the street is the hardest part about getting started. And then after that, it really is just about consistency. Trust is just consistency over time. And neighborhood building is really an act of community trust building. And so the way that you accomplish that is by having a recurring event that people can come to depend on and know that it's happening every time. And so that really requires you to be based in a place and willing to make a long-term commitment to doing incremental things in that place over time. And so if you're, highly nomadic, or if you like don't have the willingness or ability to like invest small amounts consistently over time, it's really hard to actually build the type of deep community that many people want.
Yeah, you guys sound like your manufacturing community. It's a very, very interesting take, because normally like when we see communities evolve in society, it's very like organic and natural. And this seems like I guess maybe a playbook. Do you guys have any sort of like documentation or like go-to strategies? Like you mentioned creating sort of like this reoccurring events where people can attend. And that's actually one of the pillars of like a community, is that there's rituals and traditions. So like, for example, in like the church, you have every Sunday, everybody goes to mass. In various cultures, you have these traditions, and they may not even just be like on a weekly basis, but they may be on an annual basis or a couple of times a year. Have you sort of like thought of other ways of, instead of just organizing events, are there other ways in which you can sort of like create that sense of community?
Well, I like to think of it as growing community, not manufacturing it. Okay. I don't think it looks like, well, people like to say building community, right? But you're not building it like you build a house. It doesn't work that way. It's more like a garden, organic. It's different in different places. You can't just like stamp them out in a factory. But you are right that ritual is an important part of that. I would say our 3 top things would be, one is the ritual. It's a recurring gathering of some sort, whether it's a picnic in the park, whether it's a meetup, whether it's dinner, whether you're getting together to jam if you're musicians. It doesn't have to be every week like masses, but I think weekly is the best cadence. But you can do bi-weekly, you can do once a month, as long as it's regular and people can come to expect it and plan around it and just know that there will be people there. And then the other 2 hot tips are start a chat group. or some way of communicating, whatever is the easiest. It doesn't have to be fancy, as long as it's something that's a little more intimate than email, but easy for people to use, whatever people already use. And then the third one is be out in public. Go to the coffee shop, walk down the street, grab a book and sit in the park and talk to the people who are around, especially the people you see regularly, and invite them to the gathering and the chat group. And, over time, it's kind of little things, but that's how the community grows.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add is that, in addition to all of those things, that's like the best toolkit for getting started. Once you've got that cooking, once you've got your chat group and your recurring event and people know each other, then you can really start to, do magical things together. Like that's when you can start to coordinate, build local public goods, like share resources, do the things that provide a lot of value to people in the community. So a couple of specific examples of that. I mentioned like emergency preparedness caches or community gardens as these sort of, local collective actions that you can start to take together. I think those are great examples, but really any kind of sharing ultimately is like a driving force of building and maintaining community. And so, that could look like having a shared resource list of like, I have a lawnmower and you have a drill and like we, have these things we can borrow from each other. It could also be things like childcare. Like we found that one of the best use cases for these types of neighborhoods is to raise families, because it takes a village to raise kids and it also takes kids to raise a village. And so just having the ability to have a bunch of kids running around together and have parents that can share both the burdens and joys of child rearing is a good example of this. But basically anything you can do to share time and resources is something that creates relationships of reciprocity that again build the trust at the core of a community.
Going on to like a tangent with children and childcare, I got into a discussion with another member from the ATX DAO, Jesse, who also hosts some of these podcasts sometimes. And we were talking about education being possibly the gateway of sort of like establishing these network states. Of doing like research. So we have like our education system, which a lot of people are now questioning its capabilities, and sort of like in contemporary times right now, a lot of people are willing to look for alternative education lanes, and also like childcare, and sort of like you said, it takes a community to raise children and vice versa. And we see sort of like the education system being a method and sort of like creating a homeschooling like there's already homeschooling co-ops out there, but being that sort of like the unique selling point to get, I guess, normies or people who aren't familiar with like the DAO philosophies involved into moving into this sort of like network state. I don't know if you guys have any takes or if you have any stories of somebody starting something similar within your guys' network.
Just off the top of my head, it feels like education alone is not enough.
Okay.
I think people are interested in alternative forms of education. I am. I send my kids to nature school. They spend a lot of time outside. I really like that. And they really like that. I think it's good for them. But I don't see, at least myself, moving, say, across the country because there's this particular school that's really valuable. My guess is that the new forms of education that take off will be somehow, at least partially online. You don't have to move for. I guess you can join a network state that does this kind of education, but it wouldn't be this kind of IRL community. But I think Synthesis is doing good work here. I think there's other online schools that are trying new models, but ultimately it comes down to what you do in real life that I think matters a lot, at least for now. Maybe, if Neuralink gets really good and I can live my whole life in the VR world, then that would be very different.
Yeah, I do think it is a crucial but not comprehensive component of what these types of communities or networks can offer. Like education is obviously very important in terms of instilling the values of a community and in terms of having child rearing options. And so I do think we will see, that become like a bigger part of cabin neighborhoods and other network societies over time. Another version of this that we've seen some interest in and some experiments in different cabin neighborhoods with is like family-centered third spaces So not just necessarily like purely for education, but more as like a community space where kids can come together and parents can come together, have some shared childcare, some, again, shared resources. Like kids require so much stuff, just all of the toys and strollers and bottles, and there's just like a lot of stuff involved. And so if you can have like a way to share some of that stuff as your kids age out of it, or have like a shared third space that has a bunch of like toys and arts and crafts and resources and whatever, so that you don't have to have all that stuff in your home, and you can have your kids like playing with other kids, and maybe you can be off on the side getting some work done or interacting with other parents or whatever. I think that's a really helpful model as well. And then I think, like you said, definitely co-ops or other sort of like shared child rearing, particularly in conjunction with, as Grin was describing, like online, maybe more AI based education, I think is a really good combination, because it covers both like the flexible intellectual paths for different kids while also giving them the IRL social exposure.
Yeah, wow. I think you could say the core question is not what my kids are doing during the week, but like what are they doing on the week? I think that is more what a child-oriented or education-oriented network state.
When it comes to resource sharing, and because you guys were mentioning, and I do want to take it away from, I don't want to turn this podcast into just like child rearing advice or instructions.
Yeah,
we have kids. So.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely very important. I'm very proponent on families and creating sort of like a family-centric society, because I think everything stems out from the home at sort of like even the cultural level. If you look at like cultural capital, it starts really at home. With what the kids are learning and where they're being immersed into. Deviating into sort of like resource sharing, is the current model that you guys are experiencing, is it like reciprocity based, or is there any sort of like incentives structures in place for people to share or want to share?
Yeah, so I think a pretty common problem with like crypto based projects is that they tend to over optimize for extrinsic financialized rewards. And there's a lot of great, behavioral science research that shows that when you over optimize for extrinsic motivation or financial rewards, you actually undermine intrinsic motivation, which is what is at the core of weaving strong. And so incentives are powerful, and financial incentives can be powerful, but they can also be limiting, particularly in the context of more social or community oriented activities. And so for the most part, we actually aim to not like gamify or like financially incentivize, community relationships, because we think that that is counterproductive. That said, we do have, for instance, the Cabin token is our governance token for Cabin, the DAO, and we distribute it through a gifting mechanism. So when people contribute to the community, they can be gifted our governance token by other members of the community. And we think that's like a powerful mechanism for sort of a reciprocity based token distribution. But we don't want to like, financially reward people every time they like do a specific community action.
That's a tough dichotomy, because on one side, like just sort of my take on it is reciprocity is hard to track, and reciprocity can also become political, especially in the community sense. And once a community sort of like scales up, and quite often from just sort of like my work with various communities, is you have people who, and ideally you want to instill like a philosophy of give more than you take. And I've noticed that there are sort of like these fatalists within these organizations who sort of, I guess, try to take advantage of other people's reciprocity and sort of like get more out of it than they're actually contributing. And I think, and this is my personal take, is gamifying it to a certain extent can help protect the people who are giving more than they're taking from the people who are overtaking without giving so much. And that's just sort of like my take on it. And there's been also a lot of like behavioral research around sort of like the incentives and punishment structures within sort of societies. And Yeah, I definitely agree. If you make things too external through such as financial gains or material rewards, you do create a non-intrinsic motivation for people. And community, there has to be that intrinsic sense of I belong here and sense of purpose. So I find that interesting, and sort of like then pivoting towards your guys' gifting cycles. How does that process work? Do people actually have to apply to receive gifts, or is this like somebody says, oh, so Bob down the street helped me this week and I really want to allocate some of our budget there? Because sometimes you have people who don't want to put their name in the basket, but they're also deserving of a reward.
Totally. So it's entirely informal. And
Well, it's a bit of both.
yeah, that's
We have
fair.
proposals,
We have
and
proposals.
we have
Yeah, but the gifting process is essentially informal. So there are ways that contributors can earn the cabin token through proposals to the DAO for like specific work they're doing on behalf of the DAO. But it's important to differentiate here between like the network level and the neighborhood level. And so like you said something important, which is some of these like more informal reciprocity mechanisms break down at scale. And that's true of like most things about communities, is that, they break down at scale. And so the important thing there is not to scale up, but to scale out, to have a network that has lots of small pockets. And that's what neighborhoods are really all about, is like keeping the atomic size of the community very small and local, because humans are actually very naturally good at this sort of thing. Reciprocity is ultimately about like mutual debt, and in mutual debt in a way that builds relationships, not in a way that, is like extractive financially. And so that works really well if it's the ledger, like the local ledger is a decentralized, brain-based blockchain. It's like everybody's holding, their own little abstraction of the ledger in their own heads. And people have a pretty good sense of like, the vibe of who is contributing more and who's contributing less. And then people who are extractive just like stop getting invited to things, and like this is actually a perfectly good mechanism, and trying to like overly track or make legible this system is extremely counterproductive for local communities. Now, at the network level, where not everybody knows each other, it is helpful to have, more tangible and less abstract, more legible versions of, tracking contributions. But for the most part, to the extent that you can, keeping it as like local, small, informal as possible is usually what makes for a strong community.
Yeah, I would say the best uses of these like clear financial type incentives are when the goal can be clearly defined and measured. And then it makes sense to be like, well, we have this money to achieve this concrete thing. If you do it, we'll give you the money. Everything's great. Like, a sales organization or a large company will be like, you need to, sell $1 million of product and we pay you big bonuses. But when it comes, like most community things can't be defined that way and can't be tracked that way. At least I don't know how to do it. And so that's the situation when you run into problems. When you try to incentivize those kinds of things, you end up incentivizing other things you didn't know about that you didn't really want, and you're eliminating the intrinsic incentives.
You guys mentioned sort of, or I think it was John who mentioned this. We keep sort of like this mental ledger in our head of like tracking. We do a good job with that. But then you have Dunbar's number, where it's like after 140 people, 150 people, it's sort of like you lose track of all that, and it becomes a little bit difficult to also know what somebody outside of sort of like your direct network is sort of bringing, I guess, value. And I don't mean to bring it so economical or make it so about economics, but at the end of the day, there is always this like all these transactions going on, whether it's just through actions or deeds or services, and it becomes difficult to sort of like see that outer bounds. Have you guys come across sort of these neighborhoods that sort of has expanded this Dunbar number before, and sort of like how do they go about it? Or is it still very like small communities that you guys haven't really thought needed to ran into any problems there?
Yeah, I think if you're expanding, like a neighborhood is inherently something that is in extremely close proximity and like long-term oriented. And so that really limits the number of people that even can be involved. It's basically like, is it someone who's you can easily walk over to their house? And so I think part of the point there is that you're geographically close to them. And also part of the point is that it can't be that big. And so again, I think a common problem, with these types of networks is people think you want to scale them up, that you want to grow the number of people involved in a thing. And what you actually want to do is scale them out, grow the number of little pockets of, self-contained autonomous groups. And so I think the answer to your question is you shouldn't really try, to grow that big. And a good example of this in history with early city building was the, early Greek city-states, where they thought that, Aristotle said 5,040 people is like the ideal number of citizens in a city. And they really practiced that. When they grew too big, they would literally fork the city and go start a new one. They'd like send half the people out into the wilderness to go found a new city. And by doing that, they kept them very small, which they considered to be the only viable scale for, actually practicing local self-sovereign democracy.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think the way that you scale up Dunbar's number is through what's called small world networks, where like a lot of people in your community and maybe one or two people in other communities. And if you want to do business with someone who you don't know from a different community where you don't know them well, you can go to your friend and be like, hey, do you know this guy? Can you tell me more about them? What are they like? Are they trustworthy? And so that way you have a few connections to other communities.
Yeah, I think there's that research where a guy tried to measure how many degrees away are you from a stranger on this planet, and it's I think only 8 degrees, 8 connections away. And I can just imagine that sort of doing this, I guess, wide scaling instead of like this vertical scaling. You're able to make those connections, I guess, shorter, those jumps across, because you're within this community of 140 people or 150 people. And then you just simply ask, do you know somebody from the other community? And odds are somebody within your community will know that. And I guess that's where sort of like the infrastructure that you guys are providing like comes into play. Do you guys mind telling me about sort of like how you guys are structured? Because you have your cabin at the top, and then you have these neighborhoods that are led by these stewards. Sort of like, how's that interaction, and how are those like hierarchies structured? Were these stewards, did they report in any way to cabin, or how does that whole process work with you guys?
Yeah, so you said something which is a very common type of thing people say, because we live in a very hierarchical, society. And so you said like cabin at the top and like these neighborhoods below, which is the type of thing people say all the time. But that's not how we think about things or try to structure things at cabin. There is no cabin at the top. What we have is neighborhoods are the most important part of our network. They are the actual units of the network city. They are where the things happen, where we spend our time, where we have the context of our day-to-day lives. That's the most important part. And so everything we do as a DAO is in service of these neighborhoods. And so, and each neighborhood is highly autonomous. So cabin as an entity, the DAO, is an unincorporated nonprofit association, does not own any property, does not have any like card rights or power, over the individual neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are the autonomous self-sovereign units of groups of people working together locally. And the DAO is trying to build that network and support that.
Yeah. It's just sometimes a little bit difficult when we've grown up in a society where it's always been sort of this like top-down approach. And it's interesting, like the Freudian slips of just like structuring of how I perceive it, and of this like, yeah, there's somebody at the top. And it's a very, very fair point. And I don't even know if saying sort of like bottom up type of governance is even the right way of even seeing it. I think it's much more, this is, I guess, where Balaji's sort of been talking about with his network state, and everybody else within sort of the network state world is talking about sort of like these clusters, and nobody's really above one another. Everybody's independent, but they all interact with one another. Do you guys have like, have you guys created structures where these different clusters or neighborhoods are able to interact? And do you have any sort of success stories between the interactions between these neighborhoods?
Yeah. So what you just described there is what, we would call, and really Eleanor Ostrom originally would call polycentric governance, which is many centers of governance, right? And each neighborhood is its own center of governance that has local autonomy and is typically organized around some sort of informal do-ocracy, which is basically just a governance structure of doing. Whoever does the thing gets to make the decisions about it. So that's the most important level. And then, like you said, the next most important thing is interactions between the neighborhoods. And so that's a big part of what our Neighborhood Accelerator Program is designed to do, is to bring together the stewards of these neighborhoods and create the relationships and connections between them, which is essentially the sort of small world graph style that Grin was describing, where those stewards now know each other and can, learn from what's working at different neighborhoods, or can lean on each other as like a peer support or accountability mechanism as they build their own neighborhood. So that's probably the most important like type of cross network connection. And then as I said at the beginning, there's kind of two parts of like living near friends. There's turning your neighbors into friends, and there's turning your friends into neighbors. And so part of the value of a network city is that most of your time you're spending in the context of the neighborhood where you live. But you can also go travel around to different places and feel at home, anywhere you go. So for instance, I'm working on building a neighborhood in the Bay Area in California. But right now, Grin and I are together, and we're actually together here visiting his neighborhood in the Boston area. And so I have gotten to come and, see where he lives. This evening, we're having a barbecue with a bunch of his neighbors. And so, I get to come drop into an environment that's like in some ways similar and values and vibe aligned to the place where I live, even when I'm traveling other places. And also, if I ever wanted to move somewhere else, or take anybody who, is just interested in cabin and wants to live this kind of lifestyle, you could either build your own neighborhood from scratch where you live, or you could go on our city directory, be like, where are the places in the world where this type of stuff is already happening? I'll pick one of those places to move to, because that's the type of community.
It's, I guess your guys' story just right now where you guys are at is the success story of neighborhoods connecting. Fascinating. And I know you guys have this upcoming event where you guys are going to be, I think also you have received also some support, and you're going to have speakers from Balaji, who's sort of been, I guess, the torch carrier of this concept of the network state coming up. Yeah, and this event, I believe it's called TNS. Do you guys mind telling me or sharing with the audience what this event's about, and sort of what are the goals of the event, and what can people expect from it?
Yeah, so the event is called TNS. It stands for the network. It's TNS Camp, so the Network Society Camp. And it is a 3-day event outside of Austin in Texas, so ATX DAO. And the goal is to bring together people who are thinking about this same sort of thing that we are, and more importantly, are practicing doing this sort of thing. Either they're building communities, they're working on network society adjacent stuff, they're writing about it, they're like practicing the thing. And we want to bring them together for kind of the same small world network type reasons. And also because the network society space ecosystem online is very vague and diffuse, and it's not super clear what we're even trying to do, what a network society, network state, network union is. Like you said, Balaji wrote the book, and that's one vision of how things might go, but that's not everyone's vision. Some people like a lot of it and dislike parts of it. Some people see things completely differently, and we want to work together to know each other, learn from each other, bond, and move the state of the art forward on these things.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, basically, the only thing I'd add is that like there have been some gatherings and conferences that, are basically like very large scale conferences with like speakers on the stage. It's like a one-to-many type of communication thing. And this event is really about getting together a more intimate group of builders and leaders in a small network where everybody can spend a lot of time having one-on-one relationships and building the connection and coherence around what the movement is. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can go to TNS.camp and apply to come join us. It's October 11th to 14th outside of Austin.
Yeah, I think you can
Awesome.
tell we like the peer-to-peer more than the.
Yeah, that definitely already your take about the conference. When I was when you were just mentioning it, I was like, oh yeah, that's also quite. They tend to be very hierarchical, where there's always somebody at the stage telling everybody what it's about versus trying to discuss. And this is sort of what fascinates me about the network state is now we sort of are at this concept. I don't even know if it's going to be called the network states, but this concept is sort of like we're rewriting how societies should function, or trying to at least like come up with alternatives to the system that we are already, I guess, stuck in or were born into. And there's really like no right or wrong way of doing this. So it's like very important, I guess, to organize with one another and come into this like community, or rather like come into exchange with other people who are also building it and sort of like seeing the different approaches. I do have a question, sort of like, have you guys come across somebody who has just this very alternative, on the fringes way of structuring sort of these clustered societies or network states?
Yeah, I mean, it's so early right now. There's like very few functional examples of this. And I think what we really pride ourselves on at Cabin is not some like abstract theory, but like actually doing the thing in practice. And there definitely are other groups that are much more theoretical. And I think there almost certainly are people who have some like fringe ideas in the space. What we're excited about is bringing people from across the spectrum together, and not saying like this is the one way to build a network society, but like we can all agree with this like kind of fundamentally libertarian principle that there should be many approaches and we should run lots of experiments, and people should have the autonomy to like do all kinds of crazy versions of this. For some people, the like particularly more network state oriented people, the fundamental like end goal of a network state is diplomatic recognition of territorial sovereignty. And if you want to, do life extension, or if you want to like do something that's harder to do within the regulatory constraints of, places like the United States, then there are opportunities for that. You can go to Prospera, a special economic zone in Honduras, and like try life extension therapies. And like, that's cool. And I'm glad people are doing that. And also, I'm glad people are doing, things more like what we're doing at Cabin, which is like trying to meet people where they're at and help them form and grow communities, without having to like relocate halfway across the world. And so I think like all of these, the full range, of menu options is like what I would like to see.
Yeah, I think Cabin's take, fringe contrarian take, is that there's too many fringe contrarian takes. We should just do the very left curve basic thing. Like we have our obvious truths on our website. If you go read the obvious truths, they are not out there at all. They're like, live with your friends, meet your neighbors, have kids around, these sorts of things. But it's very popular and fun to have these big ideas, these contrarian takes, and people have forgotten about the basic, I think.
That's a very, very good point, because I was going through the website last night and I was a little bit taken back that it didn't really fit into the language model that a lot of other DAOs are using. It felt much more, I guess, I have a background of working, contributing in like various communes or like squats out in Europe. And it fit more that model rather than this, like what we're seeing with a lot of DAOs of incentives and rewards and contributions and all these bounty boards. You guys really just talked about I guess, the things that you were talking about was very intrinsic, and it's cool. It seems very, I think, moderate and very doable of like trying to build out this network state in an IRL fashion. So kudos to you guys for what you guys are building and everything that you guys are doing. With these various neighborhoods, has there been, because I saw you guys have that on your list of neighborhoods, the Honduras economic free zone, and it's very curious. I didn't think about just also like the regulation aspect of what you can and cannot do in these places. In regard to the US, has there been sort of like any concerns or issues with regulation? Have you guys ran into any problems?
Yeah, so I think there's people tend to view this as a real binary particularly, more like network statey libertarian types. It's like, we need, you like can't do anything in the US. It's so hard to build anything. You like got to go to a special economic zone. And there is some truth to that. It is really hard to like build new housing in a lot of places, or certainly do things like without, FDA approval, which is a big barrier in the medical space. And so there is an important place for the more, full, regulatory, opportunity of a place like Prospera in Honduras. And like you said, Cabin has a partnership with Prospera. We have a Cabin neighborhood steward for Prospera, and we are focused on doing local community building there. And we view that both as an important part of Cabin's network of neighborhoods and an important part of what is going to help places like Prospera grow, is to be able to actually have, real local community building happening. And also, we don't take that sort of extreme view that you need to go to a place like that in order to do interesting things. One great thing about the United States is that it is a set of states. It's a federalist structure. And so Cabin's first neighborhood was started outside of Austin, Texas. And in rural areas of Texas, there are very few regulations relative to, most places in the world. You can pretty much build whatever you want to build without needing to ask permission. And so that created an amazing opportunity for our community to actually come and build physical infrastructure from scratch, from the ground up on a greenfield site, without needing permits, without needing, professionals. We just literally got out with our hands and, tools and started building housing, building community amenities. And that's very possible in the United States, in a place like, the Texas Hill Country. And then even if you're not in a place like that, I'm now working on building a neighborhood in California. California has notoriously challenging regulations for building anything. But I think there is an important role here for what we call at Cabin functional local sovereignty, which is basically just, doing things in your local community that are public goods that everyone benefits from, and not asking for permission and just doing them. You don't actually necessarily need to like get a permit to build a little community garden plot in your neighborhood. You can find an empty little patch of land no one's using and put some planter boxes there and start gardening. And like, probably nobody's going to ask questions, because it's just a good thing for the community. Everyone benefits from it. And so we, encourage people to just go do the thing, just go build it. And in a lot of cases, that allows you to cut through some of the red tape.
Yeah, I think this kind of stuff, doing things is a muscle. You have to, exercise it to make it stronger. And our doing things muscles are very atrophied. We've kind of like forgotten that it's even possible to do these things. And so you read a headline that's like, oh, you can't build and you can't do anything. But there's a lot you can do just by doing it.
You guys sound very pragmatic. I like the term functional local sovereignty, where it's just you go out and you go do it. And you also said that sort of talking, like in the beginning of this podcast, you were talking about sort of like the DAOs and how it's about doing things and taking ownership and sort of this independent ownership. And I sort of see sort of like a struggle. So just to be frank, and usually people I talk to, if like in DAO networks, I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to just sort of like DAOs and sort of the establishing these DAOs, just because my view on like human nature. And I think a lot of humans struggle with taking ownership. And I think one thing I've noticed with a lot of DAOs is they struggle with giving the person sort of that permission that they can go and do these things. And I don't know if you guys created sort of like this philosophy, or if you hammer home with anybody this sort of idea of how to take on ownership. Do you guys have anything out there for that?
Yeah, it's called Do-ocracy. And it's a really great governance structure where you do things. And that's really all there is to it. If you want to see something happen, the best way to make it happen is to go build it, to do it. And if it works, great. Other people are probably going to join in, and other people are going to want to give you more resources to keep doing the thing. And if it doesn't work, totally fine. That was an experiment. Let's try something else. And as long as it's not very expensive or a one-way door that's irreversible, do-ocracy is almost always the best way to do things at the local scale like this. There's I think a lot of learnings from the past 50 plus years of these sort of intentional community compound type places that have tried to, for the most part, have extremely consensus-based governance mechanisms where everybody sits around in a big circle and you talk about everything. And that is exhausting and not that productive most of the time. Like, what generally happens is you spend hours talking and then everybody's so tired that nobody wants to actually do anything. And so we think that a duocratic based structure is just a fundamentally better way to operate a local community.
I definitely agree with that. You guys also talked about having proposals and sort of like what would you guys maybe for DAO, or also like your personal take, where should consensus, or are there rules, or should there be rules about when consensus needs to be made versus when can somebody just go out and do something?
In the case of cabins, the only thing you really need consensus for is spending money from the treasury. That's where our proposal. So like I have a proposal that pays for me to work on cabin projects, and I can work on cabin projects without getting paid, and then I wouldn't need a proposal. I can just do it, and I can just show up and write code and talk and have ideas. But to get paid out of the cabin treasury, I need to pass a proposal. There's a process for that. And I think that for where we are now, that's a perfect system. I don't think you can design these kinds of things in abstract. I think a governance system is a solution to a problem, and the problems are different in different situations. And so you need different governance systems, different rules to solve them. So I personally don't have like a one size fits all answer for like when these things should happen.
The two places do-ocracy doesn't work is when the things you're trying to do are expensive or irreversible. And so, like Grin said, when there's actual money at stake, that's more than like a trivial amount, that's a good thing to have some sort of consensus mechanism around. And it doesn't actually necessarily have to be, or some governance mechanism around. It doesn't need to be a consensus-based process. I mean, in our case, we use quadratic weighted token voting on DAO proposals with like a minimum threshold of the number of tokens you have to hold to make a proposal. We're trying to keep it like as simple and effective as possible, but governance systems have to evolve over time to meet the needs of the community. As Grin said, there is no one size fits all.
I guess that's sort of like governments generally, or like a bureaucracy. It sort of like has a little bit of a lagging effect, or rather gets put into place once something has already occurred, and maybe people were unhappy with the situation, or it didn't run as planned, and that's when you start bringing bureaucracy maybe into it, or a form of governance. I do sort of want to pivot a little bit because we're talking about funds and proposals and things. And I sent you guys a message yesterday, sort of like topics that could be of interest, sort of like to discuss. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the compound finance and Humpy situation that occurred. I think it was in mid-July. Just for the listeners, I'll give sort of like a quick background of it. Compound finance, a protocol, was attacked. I guess there was like a governance attack by various members orchestrated by Humpy, who's also been known for attacking DAOs in this form of governance attack, where they acquire enough tokens through various wallets and submit a proposal to then get access to the funds and then use the funds for their own personal interests. I see this being a issue that DAOs it hasn't really happened much in like the IRL formats, but we're already seeing this with like various DAOs in DeFi space, of people acquiring enough voting power and submitting proposals that are for like personal interest. Have you guys ever ran into a situation like that? And if so, please share about it. And if not, do you guys sort of have a take of ways to protect your community from such governance attacks? Yeah.
I'm not an expert on governance, so I don't know. Kind of what I said before, right? You'd have to figure out on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there's a one-size answer. In our case, what there's several things that protect us from this. It's the fact that we give tokens on a gift basis, not a go on Uniswap and buy it basis. We have minimum thresholds for submitting proposals. And the ultimate thing is that we don't have a automated protocol that is governed underneath. So even if a proposal were to pass, then some human being has to go and do the thing. And if there's consensus in the community that this proposal is not legitimate and is an attack on the community, then we can just choose not to do the thing. It wouldn't be great, right? I think our community would have to be in a pretty sorry state for this to be a thing that happens. But the ultimate fallback of any sort of official governance process is the unofficial relationships that people have with each other. And so that's our strongest protection, is that we know each other, we talk to each other, we have relationships, and we can look at a formal process that comes to an outcome and be like, no, obviously not.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things unique to, the compound situation or Aragon or other, kind of like large scale DeFi DAOs that cause this to be possible. One, like Grin said, is that the tokens are liquid and, can be bought on an exchange or can be flash loaned for votes. So that level of liquidity is a big risk factor. But there's a couple other issues here. One is they're very large treasuries, right? And so the potential, the size of the prize is huge, and so obviously like makes it a higher risk factor. But another big problem is that because they're not just huge treasuries, but that huge token distributions, that there's a lot of people who own the governance tokens who don't really care about the organization that much. And like voter apathy is always going to be a problem in any voting system, but it's particularly problematic in these sort of systems because a lot of what happened, particularly like in the compound case, is they sold a lot of their governance tokens to VCs, and those VCs had then basically loaned the tokens out to local or like smaller college blockchain clubs, for instance. And that happened like 4 years ago. And then the people who they built the relationships, the VCs built the relationships with the blockchain clubs, like those people have now graduated from college. The blockchain club might not exist, or it has new leadership, or it's not like focused on the voting. And so you basically just have a problem where like it's very hard to mobilize voters because they're many steps removed from caring about the other. And so the most important thing we can do at Cabin to protect against this sort of thing is try to distribute our token to people who have added value to our organization and who care about the organization and, are interested in preventing this type of thing.
I guess with like compound finance, they had a big target on their back, just with their pool. And then also all the, I guess, voting power being in the hands of people who don't really have much of like also, and this goes back to intrinsic motivations to take care of the DAO and everything. So I guess in your guys' case, that shouldn't be at least an issue for the next however long until we get enough users onto it. Sort of looking out into like the future of DAOs and this network state, where do you guys imagine DAO going? And or maybe we can turn it back of what started the idea of creating Cabin, and then where do you guys see this going, and sort of like the road that you guys been on, and sort of what are the steps that you guys taken to get there in the direction that you want to go in?
Yeah, so Cabin originally started with a group called the Creator Co-op, which was a bunch of online creators that came together during the pandemic. I was building a cabin out in the Texas Hill Country, invited the creators out, and we got together in person and decided to create a residency program to bring online creators out and give them a chance to come out to the cabin and work out there and work on their own creative processes. We structured that as a token-based donation crowdfund, and we distributed a token to all the people who donated to give them votes in who got to come out for these residencies. That was the origin of the DAO. And the original 101 token holders and participants in the DAO, came through those donations. And so the thing about this that I think is important is like in that era in 2021, there were a lot of people saying, let's make a DAO, and then trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? And, what are we going to govern and all these things. And I think it's really important to do it the opposite way, to start with like, we have an actual thing we're trying to accomplish, and there is a reason why the structure of a DAO makes sense to try to accomplish this. And from there, you can grow. We always had, the kind of dream and ambition of growing this residency program into something much bigger, into a network city. But you have to start with something really concrete and specific. And I think that was a trap that a lot of, the 2021 era, let's just make a DAO type groups fell into. And as a result, 99% of the DAOs that were created in that era are dead and gone. And the only ones that survived are the ones that have more of a deep underlying purpose. And so I think that's the most important part, is like finding that core meaning and purpose and tangible reason why you actually this structure. And, in terms of where I think they're going, I think it's pretty evident that like a lot of optimism in that cycle didn't pan out, and that DAOs were not the panacea that, some people thought they would be. But I am still a believer in the idea that experimenting with novel governance structures for online communities and networks to practice self-sovereignty together and practice collective action together is a huge opportunity and a big part of the future of organizations, but it took, hundreds of years to develop modern nation state governments in a way that actually worked. And, hopefully it won't take hundreds of years to get there with DAOs. But I do think that like you can only move at the speed of trust and at the speed of, experimentation that grows from communities. And that is inherently not going to happen in a 1 or 2 year crypto hype cycle.
Yeah, I would say what is clear is that today's forms of government are becoming outdated. They don't really meet our needs. There's new technology and ideas that are available. So there's going to be more experiments in this direction. There's going to be more combining the internet's magic with things like existing communities in the real world. And yeah, I don't know exactly where we're going to land, but it's going to be some form of a little bit of what we have today, but a lot of what's new and newly possible.
Seems like this is a long game. Like you guys are in it for the long game. And it was a good point about setting sort of like your goals first of what you want to establish, and then go in the directions of building a DAO. Like there's the first two that came to my mind is the hot pot DAO and the pizza DAO, where it's super basic, where it's like you want to organize around just eating a meal. And from there, it's sort of like developed into their own DAOs and now their own communities, where now they're like exploring deeper connections with these people. Like, for example, Hot Pot DAO is like totally decentralized, like just off the bat, because those just like anybody who goes to a crypto conference can organize a hot pot dinner with other people. The same thing with Pizza DAO. So I think that's a very, very good point of like first setting a goal and then building your DAO maybe around that. Yeah. So going around in the direction of like coming out with a DAO, and it sounds like I think we can come to consensus. We didn't really vote on it or submit a proposal for it, but it sounds like first setting a goal and then building a DAO. What would be the steps for somebody who's interested in building a DAO? Let's say they have a goal and they want to go build that out as a DAO. What would be sort of like their go-to advice for like the beginners to go from 0 to 1?
Yeah, well, first of all, like, again, if your goal is to build a DAO, you've already like made a mistake here.
That's a very good point. But like, yeah, that's a very good point.
Like your goal has to be to do something else, and the DAO has to be the best structure to achieve that goal. And so the question you should ask yourself is like, what are DAOs good and bad at? Because DAOs are really bad at some things, and we've like seen plenty of examples of how it doesn't work. And so you have to have an inclination that the things they're good at are going to outweigh the things they're bad at for the type of thing you're trying to do. You know, it's the same advice for startups. Like nobody should just go like start a company because they want to like be the CEO of a company. That's a really bad reason, and it's not going to work. You have to have some like, user problem that you really care about solving. And there's
definitely founders out there who started a startup just to start a startup.
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
That's the easy part.
Yeah,
starting a startup is really easy. Anyone can do it.
Yeah, totally. And so you the question then is like, what are DAOs good and bad at? And the answer to that is like, basically hierarchical centralized organizations are much more efficient at like executing on a specific thing most of the time. And so this is why you want DAOs to operate as small autonomous pods who can have those sort of benefits of, moving fast and moving clearly towards a goal. What the network is good at is being a network. And, what networks are best at is making connections between things or exploring territory that, you might not be able to explore as easily or connect to as easily with like a small focus group, and getting like a broad, building a consensus of opinions across a network, right, is like a useful thing that DAOs can use to gain information through a governance process. But ultimately, the best thing you can do is look at examples of the types of organizations that have operated in a decentralized way and worked effectively. And so there's a number of these types of organizations, everything from, corporations like Amazon, which operates in like a more DAO-like structure where they have lots of independent pods with a high degree of autonomy, to organizations like the Marines. People often think of the military as being this big, like hierarchical organization, but the Marines actually don't operate that way for the most part. In response to the last 30, 40 years of evolving warfare, which has become more decentralized, particularly fighting against things like terrorist cells, the Marines have adapted to that. And so what they try to do is they have one kind of clear overarching mission that everyone can align towards, but then they put a lot of autonomy and ownership into these very small leaderful pods. And so it's not that there's no leaders. That's usually a terrible idea. It's that there is some clear overarching goal that everyone's aligned to. And then there's lots of local leaders who, can try things and experiment and have autonomy within their context. That is a super important part of it. Another important part you learn from organizations like this, another good example is Valve, the game company, which operates in a very decentralized way. And they say the first most important thing is their hiring process, is essentially bringing the right people in. And this is another thing that I think DAOs can either be very good or bad at, and is make or break, is are you bringing in the right people? Because if you're bringing in the type of people who thrive within a highly autonomous environment, then you're going to succeed. And if you don't, then you're going to fail. And so figuring out those onboarding mechanisms or those filtering mechanisms that allow, the right people to end up being the ones who are making the contributions is another really important.
Yeah, I think it's easier to make a list of like reasons not to do the DAO thing. So I'll add one to that list. I often hear people see people looking at existing organizations and being like, it would be so much better to do that in a decentralized way. Like, we want a decentralized Uber, we want a decentralized whatever. And I feel like that's almost always a mistake, because the organization that exists, like Uber, is really good at what they do, and their structure is like really enmeshed with that. If you're trying to build a completely different structure to do the same exact thing, it's probably not going to work. You probably want, if what you really are looking for is like a DAO that's successful, it needs to be doing something very different than traditional hierarchical organizations are trying to do.
Yeah, Cabin could never be built by like an extremely vertically integrated hierarchical company, because neighborhoods don't grow that way. They are inherently local, organic, bottom-up, community-based structures. And so they need an organizational structure that.
Yeah, and like you said, like organizations grow. They're not just finished. And so let's say there were two sets of people who started at the exact same place. One was like trying to do what Cabin's trying to do as a DAO, and the other one was trying to do what Cabin's trying to do as a hierarchical, centralized organization. They would just grow in different directions and become different things over time. And then when you look at them 5 years later, you would be like, they would be doing different things in very different ways. They probably wouldn't even be in competition.
Very good point. It got me thinking, it could be sort of like the chicken and the egg scenario, where does DAOs open up new opportunities where things that, such as building a not building a neighborhood, but connecting a neighborhood, was so difficult to do I guess I don't want to repeat my previous word, but manufacture sort of that sense of community. But like DAOs may offer, I guess, a protocol or a fabric of substance where they can actually interact with one another in sort of, I guess, like a little bit more of a traceable way. So is it sort of like the DAOs are now providing tooling for things that never had tooling in the past, or is the DAO allowing new forms of organizations to come up? And it's sort of like chicken versus the egg. I don't even know if I see it somewhere in the middle where it's like it's a symbiotic relationship between the two. But what really got me thinking about DAOs and seeing it as a potential tooling was never at like the organizational level, looking at a business and being like, hey, this should be working as a DAO. But it actually inspired me from my working with communes and how disorganized it sometimes was, and consensus was also difficult on like important decisions about not making money, but how are we going to spend our money, or how are we going to organize our month, who does what jobs, and all that stuff was always chaos. And I sort of like see the DAO as like the perfect tooling for those communes.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that I think comes from Balaji, maybe, where it's something like, crypto. The interesting thing about crypto is that it turns, communists into capitalists and capitalists into communists, or something like that, right? And it's sort of like, if you're approaching it from the perspective of companies, it's like, okay, well, this is sort of like companies, but like more decentralized. And if you're approaching it from the perspective of communes, it's like, well, this is sort of like communes, but like more organized. And I think that is like a helpful model to think about it as like this new form that is neither one of those things, but an interesting, meshing of the two. Also, to return actually to, you use the word manufacture again, and I want to this is actually, I think, a good example, right, where you said manufacturing and Grim was like, no, it's more like an organic gardening, you're like growing. This is the same type of idea embodied in those words. Like, companies are good at manufacturing because manufacturing is a process that requires extreme efficiency, streamlining, cookie cutter repetition of a thing. That's what companies are really good at. Okay. That is not what DAOs are really good at. DAOs are good at the organic growing, the bottom up sense of like, are we fitting the thing into the ecosystem niche, in its local environment?
Very interesting point. That's sort of how, and I said manufacturing, I guess that's the word choice of, because you can all, things happen organically, but like it's again, chicken or the egg type situation where it's like, are you actually manufacturing, or is this organic, or is this like organic manufacturing? Yeah, that's just a very interesting take. And like the background story of DAOs just trying to figure out how to govern a decentralized protocol, and how that tooling is now, I find it very just interesting that this tooling is very applicable to things that didn't have, I guess, structures. Maybe this is just a mapping of structures on IRL things and communities. Yeah, and do want to, as we're starting to wrap up, I do want to ask you guys sort of like, what do you see as I already asked this sort of with the future, but where do you sort of see humanity coming into this? And it's a very abstract question. Humanity coming into DAOs and sort of this restructuring of society. I know Grin was talking about sort of like how the society as we know it is sort of just not in the greatest condition, and people are now sort of looking for alternatives. Where do you sort of see the human race going, and where do you think DAOs could play a part in, and what's sort of the utopian way of approaching the DAOs in the sort of like greater societal context?
Oh, great. Easy question. No problem.
I know. Feel free to take it in any tangent you want. This is something you could just spend 8 hours talking about over a glass of wine and just philosophizing.
Yeah, it feels like if you spend a lot of time online, there's two common camps you can wind up in about where we're going. One is this kind of accelerationist longevity. We're going to live forever on Mars with cheap, abundant energy. We'll take over the solar system. It sounds cool, and I like it. I support those things. And then there's a different camp, which is more like, the Earth can't sustain human life at this rate. We're using our resources too quickly. We need to scale down. We need to go back to an older, more human-focused form of lifestyle. And honestly, I like that one too. I think the answer is a mix of both. I think that this is, if you listen to this podcast, you might hear us often saying it's this third thing that is a mix of both. That's very much our take on many things. There doesn't need to be this strong fight or dichotomy between things. I think the answer is often combining the best of what's new and what already exists. So my ideal vision is a combination of those two. It is like a return in some ways to a more village type of life, like a new old way of living. But it's not just a village. It's not, we're going to go live in the middle of the woods and not talk to anyone. It's a network village. We are building new things we couldn't build before. We are making energy cheaper. We are expanding to new parts of our physical realm. And we're doing it in this kind of more human focused way, more human scale way, less strict, arbitrary kind of way.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I also think you just said, what is the sort of like utopian future, of DAOs and society? I don't really buy, the term utopia. I think it's like inherently fraught. There is really no such thing as utopia. A word I prefer is protopia. And the idea of a protopia is it's like the actual things you can go do today to try to take steps towards this goal, this world. And I think Grin is right. We often do try to find the third way. We're sort of moderate extremists or like extreme moderates. And we want to pull in the best of technology and the best of nature and the best of existing, social institutions and the best of historical examples of organizing together and try to find something that allows us to get back to the basics and take very practical steps towards this type of not utopia, but protopia. And so I think that, DAOs can play a role in that, but the larger, vision of network societies is basically finding a way to go back to the basics and find a different path forward where we're not saying the institutions are all broken and we're just going to throw up our hands in the air, or we're going to try to take over the existing institutions and, fix them or something. It's like, we're just going to go throw a better party. We're just going to go practice local sovereignty. We're just going to go do real things in the real world with real people who live near us. And that's the only way that we can actually practically build towards the version of the future that we want to see.
Very, very, very moderate, yet extreme. I appreciate that. There's that one quote, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And sort of like, if you really try to build the perfect structure with the best of intentions of a utopia, it could lead to a sort of a disastrous path. So it's sort of, I guess it has to be like a symbiotic revolution that's occurring right now.
Yeah. And do you know that there's that picture everybody uses, the meme of like, what society would be like if we just did this thing, and it's this picture of all these like silver skyscrapers and flying cars and stuff. You know what's missing from that picture?
What's missing?
People. There's like one dude walking a dog, that's the only person. And so I think a lot of the sort of network state movement can sometimes fall into this trap, which is like, we're envisioning this perfect techno-optimist utopian society. And we're techno-optimists. But like at the end of the day, it's really all about people and it's all about relationships. That's what a society is. And so I think as long as you're centering in that, you're probably going to do a lot better in the long run in like actually building the type of societies.
Very well said. Do you guys want to leave some links before we sign off? Leave some infos where people can find your guys' work, put in your own Twitter handles, plug in your own contact information so people can help and check out your guys' platform, help, and also reach out to you guys.
Sure. Yeah. Cabin.city is the best place to find us. Also on Twitter at cabin.city if you spell it out. Come check it out. Take a look at what you see. And if you like it, we encourage you to participate. For me personally, I'm at grin.io. that's my website, and all of my other stuff is off the website. I'm going to spend most of my time on Farcaster, actually. So techno optimist in that sense. Or also come find me in Boston.
Cool. And I'm John Hillis. You can find all my links at johnhillis.com, JONHILLIS.com. And then the other two kind of specific pointers I'll throw out are, if you're interested in joining our network, our Neighborhood Accelerator Program, you can go to cabin.city/accelerator. And if you're interested in coming to Network Society Camp, you can go to tns.camp.
Okay. Awesome plug. Yeah, definitely check out the TNS.camp. I'm going to be seeing my schedule since it's right outside of Austin, Texas, and see if I can swing by. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you to the listeners. Grin, John, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for all the work you guys are doing. I think it's wonderful, and it's an inspiring story, and also a bit of a revolution that's being in the make. So thank you very much for your guys' work.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate spending the time with you today, Philip.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.